Um, Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction. Much appreciated. My apologies for not being able to be there in person today. Some last minute logistical issues caused some problems. Um, and so again, I apologize for that. But let me first start out by thanking the organizers for the ReOpen California Now conference. Um, Really for putting on this event. I think at a time like this when we're facing indefinite stay-at-home orders, I think it's incredibly valuable that we have a forum where we can discuss, why it's so important to reopen California's schools and businesses now, um, and do so in a safe and responsible manner. Also, I think it's incredibly important that you know we actually have a forum that demonstrates that you can do this safely and responsibly. So I wanted to begin today's panel by giving a little bit of background on the state of the California economy that businesses find us in today. And I thought that maybe presenting two quotations would help sort of frame the discussion. um, and so let's start. Hopefully, I think you can see it. You can all see my slides. So the first quotation is from Richard Clarida, who's vice chair of the Federal Reserve. And he states, in the first half of this year, the COVID-19 pandemic and the mitigation efforts put in place to contain it delivered the most severe blow to the US economy since the Great Depression. And those are pretty strong words, but they do reflect the fact that the government shutdowns and a lot of fear and uncertainty on the part of consumers, resulted in significant damage to economies across the world, and including California. And one might think that given the severity of the recession, that policymakers in Sacramento would express a great deal of urgency in reopening the state's economy. Um, the state has historically had a lot of experience with boom and bust budgeting because of business cycles driving volatile tax revenue. And so you would expect, certain an amount of concern and urgency expressed by state policymakers. But instead, the um, the sentiment that we're getting is a little different. And here's a quotation from Dee Dee Myers, who's the new director of the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And she stated, and this was in December, we all understand that we can't get businesses back going again until this virus is under control. Now, a statement like that probably wouldn't have shocked me back in March or April. You know, Back then we really had no idea what we were really facing as far as the pandemic is concerned. But given that we're hearing that 8 to 9 months later in December, it is somewhat surprising. So let's dig into the data a little bit and see what's happened to the California economy, and see if we can understand, see if we can make sense of these two statements. So this first slide is from this shows economic growth, so GDP, um, and this is from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. And what this shows is that basically in 2019, the U.S. economy, California economy were bouncing along nicely. The U.S. economy, so these are quarterly, this is growth rates per quarter, but these growth rates are annualized. So essentially, in 2019, the U.S. economy was growing, between 1.5 and 2.9% for the year. The California economy was stronger, growing between 2.6 and 6.6% during the year. Then we get to the first quarter of 2020, when the pandemic is really starting to take effect. You see 4 to 5% negative growth. So that's where the recession is first kicking in. And then it just plunges in the second. So 31% negative growth. And so those numbers are shocking, and those are comparable to what you might find from the Great Depression. So Richard Clarida was correct in that respect. He then also went on to say, though, that this recession might be notable, the COVID-19 recession might be notable for just how fast the recovery was, because it's kind of unprecedented. And we see this in the third quarter of 2020 with growth rates of 31 to 33%. So it's kind of shocking. I'm not sure a lot of people really expected to see that kind of snapback that fast. That growth was also, well, the severity of the recession and the growth is reflected through unemployment numbers. And unemployment can be a little misleading, but this shows that in 2019 to early part of 2020, California, the US were humming along, historically low unemployment rates, around 3.9% for California, 3.5% for the US. And then the pandemic kicks in, you have stay-at-home orders, and unemployment just bumps up to 16.4% for the US, for California, 14.7% for the US. Then, as you know, gradually the economy starts to reopen, and actually, as you find that that larger corporations realize, hey, we can work remotely, we can figure this out, and consumers get a little bit more confident about things, spending picks up, then you start to see the unemployment rate come down. And it's come down pretty quickly. It's still very high right now. Last numbers show 8.2% in California, 6.7% nationally. But the snapback has been pretty surprising. Now, the strength of the recovery, you can see it in a number of different statistics. A lot of these are tracked by Sacramento analysts, the folks that are planning, that are tracking revenue and planning future budget. So if you look at any number of these statistics, so income tax withholding, collections in December a lot higher than they were in December of 2019. Total withholding since late March is 5.2% above the same period in 2019. If you look at US retail sales, they're up year over year. You look at credit card and debit card spending, basically like the LAO does that. They have an index that they created that shows that California's sales tax base has been growing for the last 7 months and currently is 4.5% above its January level, so above its pre-pandemic level. Home prices are up 9%, above year over year growth. Home sales are up. New business creations up. So the economy, at least parts of it, are actually doing very well. And this gets reflected in state revenue. And this really is the chart that I think kind of explains why we're not seeing urgency on the part of Sacramento policymakers. And that's because there's no crisis in Sacramento. So this legislative analyst office put out a revenue forecast in November showing expected tax revenue for the next couple of years. For 2021, so our current fiscal year, basically we have $33.9 billion more than they thought that they would have, than they thought we would have when they passed the budget in July. We actually have $1 billion more than what projections were telling us pre-pandemic. So we're flush with cash. And the numbers don't look too bad going out to 21, 22 or 22, 23 either. So based on the budget that was passed in July, we're going to have an extra $30 billion in the following fiscal year, an additional $23.6 billion in that following year. So we're actually doing surprisingly well. And I think that that's the reason why you're not seeing policymakers sort of panic and scream at the top of their lungs that we need to reopen. But as we all know, this is just part of the story. So there's strength in the California economy, but there's also weakness too. So this slide shows that not everyone is doing well. This shows consumer spending. Let me tell you a little bit about this. So tracktherecovery.org, it's a site that it's an open site that everyone can visit. It's run by Harvard, MIT researchers in conjunction with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they have partnerships with various companies that provide data like this. So this is tracking debit card and credit card spending by California consumers. And as we can see, generally speaking, yeah, spending is a little lower, 5.5% overall compared to January. But what you really see is that we get hit in restaurants and hotels. 30% spending is 30% lower. Entertainment and recreation, 61% lower. So there are industries that are, despite the rosy picture generally, there are industries that are really getting hit and continue to get hit in this economy. In addition to specific industries, small business generally is getting hammered, and I'm sure that John will have a lot to say to weigh in during his remarks. But here is data showing small business revenue in California compared to January 2020 for small businesses. So what this says is that basically large businesses are doing all right. Small businesses overall spending is down 30%. And for particular sectors like leisure and hospitality, it's down 62%. So small businesses are struggling. The next slide, this is one where the researchers were actually able to capture, this is like transaction data. So they're tracking whether or not small businesses are actually reporting financial transactions. And here we see that that overall for small businesses, at least 33% fewer businesses are reporting transactions as of December 9th. So they might be temporarily closed, they might be permanently closed. It's not clear, but they are not operating. For leisure and hospitality, the number is almost 50%. Now, you might ask, okay, so, could California do anything different? I mean, it's a global pandemic. All economies are getting hammered. our hands are pretty much tied. So what you see is what you see, and it's sad, but that's the way it is. Well, it turns out that's not the way it is. Researchers at Chapman University actually put together an interesting index, an indicator where they were able to measure. They looked at 8 different types of mandates that the 50 states have put out since March. They were able to sort of quantify them and compare them, turn them, make apples to apples comparison, and then rank the states based on how restrictive they were, or whether they were more restrictive or less restrictive. So the way to look at this index is a score of 0 is what the average state would be, and scores above, positive scores are more restrictive, and negative scores are less restrictive. So the top 10 here, the top 10 most restrictive states. No surprising, you see New York at the top, and not too far behind is California. Least restrictive states, sure, they're smaller, in the South, Mississippi, Georgia. I think Texas is probably, I think, the 13th or 14th least restrictive state, just to give you some perspective. So what the researchers at Chapman did, they created this index where they could measure, how stringent each state's mandates are. And then they conducted a statistical analysis to show the impact of these mandates on job growth. So this was an interesting finding. So in looking at these 5 states, California, Florida, Texas, New York, and Illinois, they controlled for these states' previous rates of job growth. They controlled for the size of some of these impacted industries like leisure and hospitality. And when you control for those, you still find that state mandates, influence job growth. And from this, so they're saying that essentially an additional 3% decline in job growth is due specifically to state mandates. So California's especially stringent mandates have cost the California economy about 500,000 jobs. So now we start to look forward. I mean, that shows that kind of gives the landscape of where we are today. And now we start to look forward. The US Census Bureau has done some interesting work. They're doing regular surveys of small businesses to understand how they've been coping with COVID. And from their survey, 37.6% of California small businesses say in the next 6 months they're going to require additional finance. And that is 7 percentage points higher than the national average. Also, in the next 6 months, 6.3% of California small businesses surveyed expect to permanently close. And that's 1.6 percentage points above the national average. So that's looking at small businesses. Employment, I told you that the unemployment rate is kind of a tricky number because it sort of hides things. But as of November, there are 1.5 million unemployed Californians. And that's an increase of almost 800,000 since November. A big chunk of this is almost 600,000 Californians who have left the labor force entirely. And that's what the unemployment rate doesn't show. The unemployment rate captures those who are still in the labor force looking for jobs. But if you're discouraged and you stop looking for work, you don't get counted in the unemployment. So this is the final slide, and I hope it'll sort of kick off, help spur some of the discussion for the remainder of the panel. But there are a number of questions that are going to drive how California businesses get through the next few months and the next year, and what the impacts will be on the California economy. So, right, so far we've seen that economic impacts have really been concentrated in a few areas. So restaurants, entertainment, hospitality. If the shutdowns keep going, will we see this spill over into the larger economy, and then start affecting state revenue? We have a ton of uncertainty. No one knows when the pandemic will end. We're currently starting to roll out vaccines. We're behind schedule, and the virus isn't really letting up. We're seeing surges. We are seeing mutations. So we're not sure if we're going to be here in another year talking about this still. There's also uncertainty on the well, there's less uncertainty as far as the federal government providing additional financial assistance, because they just passed another stimulus. But it's not clear that we can keep doing stimulus packages year after year. And you see that they're getting smaller, and you see that they're getting more restrictive. And quite frankly, you can only add so many more trillions of dollars to federal debt. So until the appetite for that runs out. As far as state policies go, that the real key is that we've seen that mandated shutdowns have worsened the severity of California's economic outcome. So, but the question is, can we influence state policymakers to kind of change direction? Can we do that without before state revenues start to shrink significantly? So with that, I will hand it over to John, I guess.